Elvis Presley was halfway through a quiet rehearsal inside RCA Studio A on June 3, 1972, when Priscilla suddenly stepped through the door. He thought he could hold it together, but the truth was he'd been breaking for months. What happened next stunned his band and changed the room forever. RCA Studio A always carried a special kind of silence before Elvis walked in. Not an empty silence. More like a heavy breath the whole building took at once. On June 3, 1972, that silence felt thicker than usual. The clock on the wall read 6:42 p.m., and the long fluorescent lights buzzed softly overhead. The amps warmed the air until it smelled like dust and hot metal. A bootleg tape recorder blinked red from the corner, almost hidden behind a stack of cables. James Burton tuned his Telecaster by feel, giving it soft plucks that barely echoed. Ronnie Tutt tapped a loose rhythm on the side of his snare, patient but alert. The men weren't nervous, just watchful. When Elvis felt off, the whole room felt off with him. And tonight, he looked like someone trying hard not to let his hands shake. He wore a plain black shirt instead of the flashy rehearsal jumpsuits. His hair wasn't styled, just pushed back quickly with water. He kept reading the lyric sheet for Always on My Mind. Not like he was studying it, but like he was trying to hold onto something printed between the lines. His fingers smudged the paper every time he traced the chorus. The sound engineer, Al Pachucki, adjusted a fader and whispered to himself about levels. Even his voice carried a careful tone, like he didn't want to upset the balance of the room. Funny how a handful of people in a studio could feel more intense than 20,000 people at Madison Square Garden. Pressure isn't always about size. Sometimes it's about ghosts. Elvis cleared his throat, cracked even though he tried to steady it. He gave a small nod to James. "Let's go from the top," he said, but his voice sounded like it had been scraped thin. The band started slow, letting him settle. Burton's guitar shimmered in soft bends. The drums brushed gently. Elvis stepped up to the mic and closed his eyes for a long moment before singing the first line. His voice came out warm but fragile, like a candle flickering in a draft. Everyone felt it, the kind of feeling where you wonder what someone is fighting inside and if they're close to losing. Halfway through the first verse, the hallway outside grew faintly louder. A soft shuffle of steps. A pause. Another step. It wasn't unusual for people to come and go, but something in the rhythm felt off. Elvis opened his eyes at the sound, just barely. His expression tightened, then smoothed out again fast, like someone trying to pretend they didn't hear what they heard. James noticed. Ronnie noticed. Even Al, behind the glass, leaned forward. The footsteps stopped right behind the studio door. Elvis inhaled sharply, and for a split second, the mic caught the smallest tremble in his breath. It was the kind of sound no one would recognize unless they were listening closely. But everyone in that room was listening closely. Why do some memories rush back with just a soft sound? Why do certain doors, when they open, pull every feeling you tried to bury straight to the surface? The metal handle turned slowly. The lights above flickered as if the building itself reacted. Elvis's shoulders stiffened. His grip on the lyric sheet tightened until the paper bent sharply. The band froze mid-note, instruments hanging in the air like questions waiting for answers. The door opened. A familiar shadow stretched across the studio floor, long and unmistakable. Someone took a quiet breath, and Elvis went completely still, as if the world had paused on a single frame. Something was about to break. Priscilla stepped into the room like a memory no one was ready for. She wore a light blue jacket, simple but graceful, and the studio's dim light caught the edges of her hair. The moment she entered, the air tightened. Even the soft hum of the amps seemed to fade, as if the room itself took a breath and held it. James Burton lowered his guitar instantly. Ronnie Tutt froze with one drumstick raised. Al Pachucki stared through the glass, confused, and then slowly reached for the volume knobs, as if turning the world down might make the moment clearer. No one expected her. Not today. Not during this song. And definitely not during a night when Elvis already felt fragile. Elvis tried to stay in the lyric, but the moment he saw her step forward, his voice slipped. The last note broke. Not cracked, broke. The kind of break a person can't take back. His hand dropped from the microphone. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. The pain was visible in every muscle in his face. Priscilla hesitated in the doorway. She didn't smile. She didn't wave. She just stood there, holding something in her hands. Something small, wrapped in a folded cloth. She looked as if she had been rehearsing what to say but had forgotten all the words the moment she saw him. Every sound in the studio dimmed. It was quiet enough to hear Elvis swallow. Why do some people have the power to shake us even after the story is over? And why do unfinished feelings return the moment we think we're strong enough to face them? She took one step forward. The floorboard creaked softly. Elvis took half a step back, almost without realizing it. It wasn't fear. It wasn't anger. It was something deeper, like he was trying to protect a part of himself that was already too bruised. James looked at Ronnie, eyes wide, silently asking, "Do we keep playing? Do we stop?" Ronnie slowly set his sticks down. Al raised his hand in the control room, unsure whether to cut the tape or let it roll. Small choices felt enormous. Elvis opened his mouth as if to speak, but only a faint breath came out. He looked at the cloth in Priscilla's hands. She gently unfolded it. Inside was the dark scarf he had left at Graceland a week earlier. A simple scarf, but history clung to it. Long nights, old promises, things they never said out loud. Elvis stared at it like it was a message he didn't know how to read. She stepped closer and whispered, "You forgot this." Those words hit harder than anything shouted. The lights above flickered again. Somewhere deep in the building, a door slammed from another room, sending a low echo through the walls. It was a small sound, but in the tense quiet, it made everyone jump. Elvis finally spoke, but his voice was barely a whisper. "Why are you here?" Not angry, not accusing, just hurt. Priscilla looked down. She seemed to search for the right sentence, but none came. She just held out the scarf like a memory she was returning. James shifted his weight. Ronnie ran a hand through his hair. No one wanted to interrupt, but the silence felt too heavy to survive for long. This wasn't a public moment. It wasn't a stage. It wasn't a headline or a fan rumor waiting to happen. It was two people standing in the one room where truth didn't know how to hide. Elvis took a small breath. Then he whispered something that made every person in the studio look up. Everything was about to change. Elvis's whisper hovered in the air like smoke. "I can't sing this with you here." The words were soft, but they cut through the studio sharper than any shout could. James Burton froze with his hand still on the fretboard. Ronnie Tutt's foot stopped mid-tap on the pedal. Even Al Pachucki, safely behind the glass, leaned closer, as if maybe he heard him wrong. But Elvis didn't repeat himself. He didn't have to. His shoulders said the rest. Tense, guarded, tired. He looked like someone who had been carrying too much for too long. Priscilla didn't move. She held the scarf gently with both hands, almost like she was afraid to crush it. Her eyes flicked briefly to the floor, then back up at him. The silence between them felt like a whole conversation no one else could understand. A soft thump echoed from the hallway, then faded. Small sounds now felt huge. The studio lights hummed overhead. Someone's bracelet rattled quietly. Even breathing seemed too loud. Red West and Sunny West stood alert near the door. They weren't sure whether to step in or stay out of it. Their job was to protect Elvis, but protect him from what? Pain, truth, or himself. They exchanged glances, waiting for a sign, any sign, to tell them what to do. Elvis looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. To hide it, he gripped the lyric sheet tighter until it crinkled beneath his fingers. The pages felt heavier than paper. More like memories, regrets, things he wasn't ready to look at. He tried again to speak, but the words stuck. His breath came unsteady, like he was fighting something inside. The line on the lyric sheet blurred. He blinked fast, trying to steady himself. Why does the heart remember what the mind tries to forget? Why do old wounds hurt most when we think we've finally healed? Priscilla stepped closer, just half a step. Elvis flinched, not backward, but inward, like her nearness woke up something he had tried so hard to quiet. She looked at him with softness, not pity. That hurt him more. Sometimes kindness cuts deeper than anger ever could. I didn't want to upset you, she whispered. You didn't, he said. But everyone knew he was lying. James shifted awkwardly, wanting to look away but unable to. Ronnie lifted his drumstick and set it down again. No one knew whether to break the tension or respect it. Every choice felt like the wrong one. Then Priscilla carefully unfolded the scarf again. The cloth trembled slightly in her hands. Inside the folds, the dark fabric looked almost new, untouched, as if the days between them hadn't passed. She held it out. I thought you'd want this back. Elvis's breath hitched sharply. The scarf was small, ordinary, but tonight it felt like a message he hadn't asked for. A pattern-breaker moment surged through the room. So quick and sharp it drew everyone's eyes. Elvis stepped back. Just one step, but it said everything. Priscilla lowered the scarf slowly. She looked like she wanted to explain something, but she couldn't find the words. Maybe there weren't any. Behind them, Al gently lowered the recording fader, unsure if he should stop the tape or let it capture this fragile moment. He chose to let it run. The soft hiss of the reel filled the low silence, like the studio itself was listening. Elvis looked at Priscilla the way someone looks at a photograph they don't know how to hold anymore. His eyes softened, then tightened, then softened again. He swallowed hard. Why now? He whispered. It wasn't a challenge. It wasn't an accusation. It was a wound. Priscilla's voice cracked. Because I didn't know how else to see you. The room shifted. The band held their breath. Even the lights seemed to dim. Something inside Elvis swayed. Everything was about to tip. Elvis reached for the scarf, but the moment his fingers touched the edge of the fabric, something inside him snapped, quietly, almost invisibly, like a thread pulled too tight for too long. His hand trembled. He tried to steady it, but the shake grew worse. Priscilla saw it. James saw it. Everyone saw it. Elvis sank onto the nearest stool, not dramatically, but like his legs simply gave up. His breath stuttered. His shoulders folded inward. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was heartbreak finally running out of places to hide. He held the scarf to his chest. His voice came out raw. I thought I could still fix us. The sentence dropped into the room like a stone into deep water. No one knew how to catch it. Priscilla crouched beside him. Not touching, just staying near enough to show she wasn't running away. Her voice softened. Elvis, you don't have to be strong right now. Her words made it worse. His eyes squeezed shut. His breath hitched again. He pressed a hand against his face, trying to cover the emotion, but the tears slipped through anyway. Short bursts came like stuck notes. I tried. I really tried. I didn't want this. The lights above hummed softly. Somewhere in the hallway, a distant door clicked shut. The studio felt small, like all the air had been pulled into one corner. James Burton lowered his guitar completely, letting it rest against his leg. Ronnie Tutt turned his face away, blinking fast, pretending to adjust a cymbal. Grown men who had toured the world, survived chaos, crowds, tours, and tragedies. Yet this moment hit them harder than any stadium roar. Why is it so painful to see someone strong break? Why does honesty feel heavier than any stage spotlight? Elvis took a shaky breath and wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. He looked at the mic. He looked at Al behind the glass. Then something shifted, small but powerful. A choice. He sat up straighter. Not fully. Just enough. Enough to show he wasn't hiding anymore. Elvis lifted his hand slowly and pointed toward the control room. Roll it.
Al froze.
Then he leaned forward, pressed a button, and the tape hiss deepened. James whispered, Is he serious? Ronnie whispered back, Yeah, he is. Priscilla looked startled. Elvis, you don't have to sing right now. He shook his head.
No.
I do. I need this. I need to say it the only way I still know how. The band understood instantly. They didn't question him. They didn't ask if he was sure. They adjusted their seats. They tuned softly. They waited for his signal. Elvis stood. His posture was weak, but his eyes had a clarity that hadn't been there an hour earlier. He stepped to the mic, scarf still in his hand, and whispered a single word to the room. "Please." The band began to play, soft, slow, shaking just like he was. Elvis leaned into the microphone. His voice cracked on the very first breath. But he didn't stop. Something unforgettable was about to happen. The moment the tape began to roll, a soft hiss filled the studio. It wasn't loud, but somehow it made everything feel more real. Elvis stood at the microphone, breathing slowly, trying to steady the trembling in his chest. His fingers tightened around the scarf Priscilla had brought. It hung loosely from his hand, dark and soft, like a quiet memory he wasn't ready to let go of. James Burton lifted his guitar and played the first notes with a tenderness the room had never heard from him before. Ronnie Tutt followed with a gentle rhythm, each beat spaced wide, giving Elvis room to breathe. The studio lights glowed warm above them, making every tear on Elvis's face shimmer faintly. Elvis closed his eyes and sang the first line. His voice cracked, not because he missed the note, but because the truth inside the words hit him too hard. The band didn't look at him, but they felt every tremor in his voice. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't practice. It was confession. Priscilla stood a few feet away, hands clasped, watching him with a mix of sorrow and respect. She didn't interrupt. She didn't touch him. She just stood still, like she understood that this was the only way he could speak right now. Her breathing grew uneven, as if every lyric pushed her closer to tears she didn't want to show. Elvis reached the chorus, and something in his voice broke completely. The room didn't shrink away from it. The musicians leaned into it. His words were fragile, but each one carried weight, landing softly in the space between him and Priscilla. His voice thinned, thickened, wavered, but he kept going. Why is it that some apologies can't be spoken? Why do certain feelings only unlock when wrapped in melody and memory? Halfway through the song, Elvis's shoulders shook. He lowered his head, but he didn't stop. He pressed the scarf to his chest again, gripping it as if it steadied him. The fabric trembled in his hands. Short bursts slipped from his throat between lines.
I'm sorry.
I didn't see it. I didn't listen. Each one bruised the silence around him. Priscilla tried to swallow her emotion, but a tear slid down her cheek anyway. She brushed it away quickly, as if she didn't want him to see. But Elvis felt it. Even behind closed eyes, he felt it. Her quiet pain was part of the room now. The band lowered their volume as the final verse approached, letting Elvis's voice rise and fall with nothing to hide behind. His last note didn't soar. It simply trembled, then faded gently, like a soft goodbye drifting into the air. The room stayed silent long after the music stopped. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. It felt like the building itself was honoring what had just happened. Elvis wiped his face, slowly lowering the scarf. He didn't look at Priscilla right away. He just stood there, catching his breath, his chest rising and falling in shaky waves. When he finally looked at her, his eyes were red but clear. Something inside him had shifted, softened, opened. And yet, the night wasn't finished changing him. For a long moment, the studio stayed completely still. The final note Elvis had sung felt like it was still floating in the air, drifting through the warm glow of the lights. Nobody wanted to speak first. Nobody wanted to break whatever fragile, sacred thing had just settled over the room. James Burton finally exhaled, a shaky breath he didn't even know he'd been holding. Ronnie Tutt wiped his face with the back of his wrist, pretending it was sweat, not emotion. Even Al Pachucky behind the glass sat frozen, his hand resting lightly on the stop button, but unwilling to press it. The tape kept rolling, capturing the quiet as if the silence itself mattered. Priscilla stepped closer, not to comfort Elvis, but to simply stand near him. Her voice was soft. I didn't expect that. Elvis gave a small nod, still trying to catch his breath. His voice came out rough. I needed you to hear it. Not for us, just for the truth. He didn't say more. He didn't have to. She understood. Sometimes closure arrives not as a conversation, but as a song. Sometimes a final moment of honesty does what months of talking never could. Elvis folded the scarf carefully, almost tenderly, and placed it on the stool beside him. He didn't cling to it anymore. That small gesture meant more than any words he could have spoken. Something inside him had shifted, and the whole room felt it. A few hours later, long after Priscilla had left quietly through the back hallway, the musicians gathered their gear. Nobody joked or played around like they usually did. They moved slowly, respectfully, as if they were leaving a place of prayer. Before leaving, James paused by the control room window and said softly, "Al, keep a copy of that.
Al Nadid.
Already on it." That tape became a quiet treasure. Never released, never leaked for years, passed only between a small circle of people who understood the weight of that night. Some called it the June '72 raw take. Others called it the night Elvis sang his heart open. No one agreed on the name, but everyone who heard it agreed on its power. Years later, a rumor circulated among collectors about a bootleg marked Studio A, June '72, raw vocal. The story claimed that inside the sleeve was a single handwritten line. He meant every word. Some swore the handwriting belonged to Jerry Scheff. Others insisted it looked like Priscilla's. No one ever proved it. In 1998, a small brass plaque appeared in the hallway outside Studio A.
No fanfare. No ceremony.
Just a quiet installation on a beige wall. It read, "He sang what he could not say."
No signature.
No date, just the sentence. People who recorded in that studio later said they always paused at the plaque before walking in. A few even touched it like a good luck charm. And every year on June 3rd, someone left a single scarf beneath it. Dark-colored, soft, folded neatly. Some said it was a fan who knew the story. Others said it was an old bandmate. A few whispered that maybe Priscilla left it herself. Nobody ever caught the person. Nobody really wanted to. What matters is what the moment became. One night, one song, one breakdown that turned into something larger than the people in the room. A reminder carved quietly into music legend. And that reminder was leading to one final truth. Elvis stayed alone in the studio long after everyone else had left. The lights were dimmer now, humming gently above him, casting soft shadows across the empty room. The stool where he had sat earlier still held the folded scarf, resting quietly like a memory that no longer hurt as sharply. He walked toward it slowly, each step calm, steady, different from the way he had moved earlier that night. He picked it up and held it for a moment. This time, the fabric didn't shake in his hands. He wasn't clinging to it. He wasn't afraid of it. He simply felt the weight of what it meant, where they had been, what they had lost, and what they had finally let go of. He set it down again, gently, and breathed out. Elvis glanced at the microphone one more time. The metal gleamed warmly under the lights. Hours earlier, that mic had caught the most vulnerable truth he had ever let slip into a song. Now it stood silent, almost peaceful. He stepped closer and placed a hand on it, as if thanking it for holding what he couldn't say out loud. Why is it that the moments that break us sometimes become the moments that free us? And why does honesty, even when painful, leave us lighter in the end? Elvis turned toward the door, but before he left, he paused to look around the studio. The empty chairs, the coiled cables, the glass window reflecting the dim lights. Everything looked the same, yet somehow different. It felt like the room had witnessed something it would keep forever. Something private, sacred, and human. He walked out quietly, not with the weight he carried earlier, but with a soft calm settling over him. He wasn't healed completely. Heartbreak doesn't vanish in a single night. But he had faced the truth he'd been avoiding, and that truth had opened a small doorway inside him. One leading to peace, not pain. Years later, people would talk about that night like a legend. They would whisper about the raw take, the plaque, the scarf left every June, and the rare recording that surfaced among collectors. Most listeners didn't know the details. They didn't need to. They just felt the honesty inside the sound. They felt the moment a man finally stopped pretending to be unbreakable. And that's the real heart of this story. Greatness isn't only in the loud moments. Sometimes it lives in a quiet room, in a whispered confession, in a broken voice singing the truth. Elvis walked into Studio A hurting. He walked out changed. If this moment touched you, share it with someone who still believes music can heal broken places. Stories like this live on because people pass them forward. Tell us in the comments. Where were you the first time an Elvis song hit your heart? And if you're ready, there's another story waiting.